Welcome back to another episode of Marketing Girly by Sky Society. Today I am talking with Kat Vong. She is the Senior Director of E-commerce at Hourglass Cosmetics. Welcome, Kat.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I am very excited to talk about your career journey. Kat has worked across a variety of different industries. She's worked at Mattel, The Honest Company, FabFitFun, to name a few. So very excited to kind of see how you bounced around and then ended up over here at Beauty. But before we jump into your career journey, can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm actually from Canada. So I came to the US. Now it's been over 10 years, but I
Wow.
came to, yeah, I came to get my MBA at UCLA, and then stayed because why not? It's LA. And I grew up in Canada where it's very, very cold. So definitely a better climate here. And so since getting my MBA, I've worked, as you mentioned, in CPG and in beauty. But yeah, so I'm at Hourglass now, but in my background, I had a little bit of like infant toys, baby products, beauty, subscription e-com, and now luxury beauty.
Okay. Oh my gosh, I didn't know you were from Canada. So LA winter truly is so much different. Oh my gosh, that's a huge change.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh, have you brought your daughters to Canada yet?
Yes, they've been there, but in the summer, so they have
Okay.
never seen snow. They have no idea what even, I don't even think they really know what rain is like.
Oh my gosh, a dream. So, your job now is currently at Hourglass. I was talking to Kat before just how much I love the brand Hourglass. So, can you tell us what are your go-to Hourglass products that you use in your daily makeup routine?
Yeah, I mean, daily I use, so we just launched our Unreal blush this past summer. And so it's a liquid blush. So I've been using that. I also use, so every year we have the sellout product, which is our holiday palettes, ambient lighting unlocked palettes. And in the palette, you get like a bronzer, a face powder, blush. So I use that as kind of like my full face. And so just kind of like put it all over. But yeah, those
Yeah.
are my top.
The palettes are so gorgeous. They're so, so pretty and so unique, I feel, compared to what other beauty brands are making.
Yeah, yeah, we love them. And I mean, they've been a hit for us and our customers love them. So.
Amazing. Okay, so we're gonna come back to your role at Hourglass. I kind of want to start with you coming to the States to get your MBA at you said UCLA, correct?
UCLA
So,
Anderson. Yeah.
okay, UCLA. So, what made you decide one to get your MBA and then also two that you wanted to come to the States to do that?
Yeah, I mean, many things. I think I always was interested in living in the United States. I come from a smaller city in Canada and I was kind of enamored by like big city life. But upon finishing my undergrad in Canada, I lived in Toronto for a while and I was working at like an online media company. And I think I was kind of at a crossroads in my life, or my early 20s, trying to figure out like what is it that I want to do. And after kind of doing a little bit of digging into like, should I do graduate school? Should I just pursue, a career in online media and marketing? I thought going to a business program would be a good choice for, really kind of getting that skill set, meeting new people, and trying to like make my way in like um, in larger CPG specifically, especially because at the time, so I did my MBA starting in 2012. And at that time, there were a lot of recruiters at UCLA that were large CPG brand management. And that was like kind of like one of the main tracks. And so for me, I thought that was really interesting. I wanted to work in brand marketing. And so UCLA had a great program, decided to go there. And that's pretty much how it started. And also because being able to move from Canada to the US on a student visa at the time was a lot easier than trying to get a job in the US with no other,
Mhm.
yeah, no other background there. So yeah,
Was there any culture shock at all that comes from moving from Canada to the US?
I don't think so. I think Canada is like US's younger sister in some ways because I mean, most of the trends that you Americans follow, Canadians also follow. It's
Hmm.
very similar. I think LA itself maybe slightly different from where I grew up. There's an emphasis here on a lot of like it's image and beauty and fashion. And also, well, I live on the West Side, so like beach life and Pilates and yoga and veganism and things like that, which I don't think I grew up with in Canada, but I think over time, like, because I lived in Toronto, which is similar, it's big city, so you
Hmm.
get some of that, but I don't think there was much of a culture shock, no.
Yeah, I'm always curious because I have been to Niagara Falls, but I don't think that really counts as going to Canada.
It counts. It definitely
Um,
counts.
but I'd always like because obviously in my head it's very, very similar. Like I feel like that analogy of its younger sister is a good way to put it, but I just didn't know if there's anything super different coming. Because also, but I do feel like even LA, I think even if you move to LA from another state in America, it's almost a culture shock, just LA itself, because I feel like
Yeah.
LA is unique in
Yeah.
that way.
Every state, I think every state is unique and every major city is unique, right? And same with
Yeah.
Canada. I think as you go from West Coast to East Coast and back, it's very different. And I would say
Mhm.
that like Canada West Coast is probably more similar to US West Coast and the same for
Okay.
East. It's like similar vibes.
Interesting. Okay. So you come to UCLA, you do your MBA program. What was your biggest learning or growth or takeaway that you got from that program?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that the biggest takeaway is really learning, well, multiple things. So I think you really gain a great network especially if you get an MBA in the city that you plan to work, right? So for me, I stayed in LA and a lot of my friends from UCLA stayed in LA. And so we still have our network and we still, talk to each other. And actually a couple of the jobs that I got after UCLA were from business school friend referrals. And so there is that connection and that really helps in your career. The second thing is I think just really learning to be a team player and working in teams. Like they emphasize that in the program where you're just on a team pretty much for every course you're in. And so just kind of building that like team player mindset, which of course translates into the business world or any company that you work for, you're going to have to work with cross-functional people. And then, yes, of course, you develop this like foundational business skill set. However, I would say that like you really do more on the job than in business school in that sense. Like business school teaches you some of those key concepts and the theories, the fundamentals, but it's not until you get into your career that you really develop and hone those skills.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a huge, obviously there's so much value in education, but there is a big difference from learning something in the classroom versus learning or actually putting that into practice at a real company. Also interesting, I think what you mentioned about the benefit of doing your MBA in the same city or state that you want to work in. Because I feel like sometimes when I have thought of like doing an MBA program, it's like, oh, it'd be fun to go like do it in New York or something and live there for a year and then come back. But maybe something to consider is that where you take it, ideally maybe like where you want to live and work, because that's where you're going to get the most connections.
Yeah, I think if network is one of your main goals when you go to do your MBA, like then that is a huge consideration. And if it's not, and it's about exploring a different place and in different
Mhm.
industries, then that might not be part of your calculus when you're choosing an MBA program.
Mhm. And did you have work experience prior to taking your MBA?
I did. I had a few years of work experience working at an online media company in Toronto.
Okay. So a couple years of work experience, you get your MBA, and then you go over to Mattel. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about this like entrance for you into marketing at Mattel?
Yeah, so at Mattel, I mean, Mattel's a huge company. Marketing there at the time, I don't know if it's like that anymore, but marketing was kind of split into three branches. There was the global brand team. They were kind of in charge of larger, like innovation, high level concepts. Like, think like that's where the dream of Barbie is created, right? Like everything around Barbie.
Yes.
And then it trickles down into what we at the time called North America marketing. And so North America was kind of in charge of North America and how this kind of plays out across the different regions in North America. And then there's another group called customer marketing. And that was actually the group that I was in. Customer marketing means more retail focused or specific, I guess specific channels, channel marketing. And so my group, and again, because Mattel was so big, my group was very like specific to a certain retailer and certain brands within the Mattel portfolio. And so because of that, I think there's pros and cons to working at a large company like that because you learn, I think very quickly that you learn to hone skills in a very specific area, right? And you do that kind of day in and day out. And so what I learned was like promotional planning for a specific retailer within North America and kind of doing that and for like a key set of brands. And so I think after a couple of years, I was like, okay, I think I want to try something new, faster pace. Like I loved Mattel, such a great company, but I was kind of ready to like move a little quicker. And that's when I went to the Honest Company.
Okay. And
Yeah.
at Mattel, so obviously like since you working there, Barbie has like reemerged. When you were working there, was Barbie still the main thing at Mattel? Was that still kind of the focus?
It was, but Mattel is so big, so there's multiple focuses like all the time, right? Like I would say the huge tentpole brands within the Mattel portfolio are usually Barbie and Hot Wheels, and within the boys portfolio, and then within the baby world and infants, there's like Thomas the Tank Engine, and then there's other licensed like Nickelodeon or other like entertainment properties. So these are all big, but I think it just depends on the time, the year, but they're all still like they continue to be big regardless, right? It's just
Yeah.
varying levels. Yeah.
And then so at this point, you didn't have any children, is that correct?
I did not. No.
So, but you kind of started working in this space, right? Mattel is kids products, and you went over to the Honest Company. Did you like see
Right.
yourself niching down here? Or was that kind of by accident?
It was definitely by accident. And I kind of joke today that it's ironic. I started my career in baby and toy products, and now having babies, so I have twin identical girls. It's like I had at the time I had no need for baby products, but I amassed a bunch because working at these companies, you end up getting free product or you get a discount. And so I would be that aunt going to like my cousins and my family
Oh,
members, giving them like the Fisher Price toys and Barbies and things like that. But yeah, today I could use it, but I don't work in the industry anymore. But yeah,
yeah,
it's
as I
kind
said,
of funny that it's flipped.
your daughters have many years ahead of them until you working at Hourglass would be valuable.
I know. Yeah, I don't want to start them too young. They're barely two, so no mascara for you yet.
Okay, so another question I have for you is so you work now in beauty. And so one thing I notice for my younger marketers is everybody wants to work in beauty and fashion. And so you started your career not in beauty and fashion. How much like weight do you think it carries for the industry that you work in? So like you mentioned, like when you worked at Mattel and Honest Company, like those weren't companies that you personally were purchasing from versus now at Hourglass, I imagine like those types of like products or stuff that you actually directly are also a consumer of. So I don't know if you have any advice for like when you're just starting out and like deciding what companies to work for or your experience working at brands that weren't directly applicable to you when you first started your career.
That's a good question. I think it depends what you're interested in, first of all. Like, so marketing can be, you can work in marketing for any company. And as long as you have a general interest, I think you don't need to necessarily work for a company that you're super, super passionate about their products, right? Because at the beginning of your career, your goal is to grow your skill set, to learn, to become, a leader, hopefully. And you can do that at any company, really. I think it's a plus if you can work in a company that aligns with what you're interested in. But I don't think that's necessarily needed. For me, I think the baby category in CPG was adjacent to beauty because at Honest, like Honest also has a beauty business. They have, of course, their baby products, but they also have beauty. Um, I think what you learn in CPG can be applicable to the beauty industry because at the end of the day, beauty products are consumer products. And so it's really about thinking like, how can this company's products and brands still give you some experience and information and knowledge about how consumers buy products, right? And how you can reach them that is still transferable to a beauty brand. I hope that answers your question or
Yes, that's actually super helpful. And I think needs to be said, because that's also one of the things I always try to do is like, okay, like I know you want to work in beauty, but you like your first job out of college may not be that like dream beauty job at your dream company. And that when you're starting out in your career, to focus more on learning. And I think what you said there is just great advice, because you may not be able, oh my gosh, I'm working at Honest Company. I'm selling, stuff for babies. Like, how is this going to help me get the job I want in beauty? But I love what you said there about how it absolutely can teach you skills that will be transferable to the, that beauty or fashion or that other industry that you want to work on later on in your career.
Yeah. I just to add to that is that a customer is not one dimensional. Like a beauty customer is going to buy beauty products. And in my case, now I'm a mom, I buy beauty products, I buy baby products, I buy, groceries, obviously. And so it's kind of thinking about this person who they have different needs. And so if you kind of understand like some of their basis for buying the products and brands that they do, then you can, as you go through your career, start to connect those dots in understanding customers and consumer purchasing behavior in general, right? If that makes sense. So I think even though baby products was not necessarily like a direct connection to beauty, I think still understanding like why they would choose a specific baby brand over another baby brand can still be helpful in how you think about why someone would choose a specific beauty brand over another
Yes.
beauty brand.
Absolutely. I love that. Okay. So I think that's great advice. And if you're listening, I hope you took notes. I think that's also great to mention in an interview too, if you're trying to explain why your past, maybe not directly relevant experience will still make you a valuable asset for a new role. Now, at Honest Company, can you share a little bit about your experience there? Because I'm imagining at this point was Honest Company, I'm imagining it's not nearly as big as Mattel. Is that correct?
No, at the time, not well. I mean, they're still not nearly as big as Mattel. At the
Yeah.
time, though, they were actually still considered like a unicorn, valued at almost $1 billion. It was a
Oh,
huge
wow.
high growth, yeah, a huge high growth time. We were expanding into different regions. It was just like it was a very exciting and crazy, fast paced time at Honest, I will say. My role was very similar actually to what I was doing at Mattel, but more, I think, well, broader in the sense of I was working with more retail partners. And I think I had a little bit more ownership into like marketing as they relate to retail. And then partway through my time at Honest, we actually set up like a new mini department. It was sales strategy and planning. And my role was specific to the baby category, but was really working with our retail channels on figuring out how to launch our baby products into different retailers. And so it was more of a strategy role than it was marketing at that point.
Okay. So compared to Mattel going into Honest Company, what was kind of the biggest takeaway you got from working? Because I can imagine working at a company like that is just a different environment than Mattel. Or did you have any big takeaways from this time at Honest Company?
It was a very different environment. I think when you're younger and you are willing to roll up your sleeves and kind of put in the time, like I think that's when you should be doing it because at a company like Honest, it was a startup. I mean, it was a late stage startup, but still a startup. And so that means or meant um, a lot of work around the clock. Sometimes, boundaries are pushed. Smaller teams, which means you have to be scrappier, you have to be more resourceful. Whereas at Mattel, because it was such a big company, processes are pretty much set, right? There's structure. You know who to go to in certain situations because those profile or their job descriptions are very specific. Like you go to this person for this specific need. Whereas at Honest, like I think because it was just a smaller company in general, people wore many different hats. And so it was a lot of, having to work collaboratively, cross-functionally on many different things. And so maybe lines were not as clear sometimes, or, just like you just have to learn to roll with the punches, roll up your sleeves, be scrappier. I know those all sound very cliche, but it is really true of like going from a really big company to a much smaller company.
Mhm. And how did your MBA translate to a smaller company as well? I know at Mattel, I think that was like a bigger part of potentially making you qualified for that role. Do you feel like it was still really helpful for you in this new role at Honest Company?
I think it was still really helpful. At the time, Honest actually did have a lot of MBAs at the company, especially on the team that I was on. And so it was helpful. And I ended up going to Honest because of an MBA connection. And
Mm,
so that in itself was helpful. And it's also because I think Honest leans toward being a little bit more CPG than it does traditional beauty. And so because of that, there's probably a little bit more like it was a little bit more important to have an MBA in specific roles, right? I don't think you need an MBA in every role, but I think if you're in more of like a strategy or higher level marketing role, they valued that.
okay. So after Honest Company, you were there for about 2 years. Where did you end up going next?
I went to Pacifica Beauty right after Honest. So Pacifica, if your listeners don't know what it is a beauty brand that is currently at Ulta, Target. They really have a lot of different like skincare products that are all clean. I know the founder's also very, she emphasizes like sustainability. So Pacifica is that like kind of like clean beauty, eco-friendly type of brand. I ended up going there. At the time, very tight, like tiny in the sense of like people wise. So at the office, there was generally like 10, 12 people max maybe in the office. So even smaller than Honest, which when I was at Honest, there was like 300 people there. So I kept going like
Oh my
to a
gosh.
smaller and smaller company. Um, but at Pacifica, I actually transitioned more to working in marketing in general because it was such a small company. I really did juggle different hats across marketing. So on any given day, be like working on like the retail marketing, trade marketing side, but then also email marketing. And then I took on paid media as well and e-com. And so that's actually where I started really getting an interest in the digital space and email and e-commerce marketing. Yeah, but that was a really great experience.
So I can see the like similarity from Honest to Pacifica, like in terms of industry, I can kind of see that connection. But I obviously now we know not the end story, but we know where you are now, which is Hourglass. Did you know at this point after beauty that that was like a space that you wanted to niche down in, or were you still pretty open to roles, irregardless of industry?
I think I was open to roles, but being a beauty customer and consumer, I was interested in working in the beauty space. I don't think that I set out to work in beauty, to be honest, when I was at UCLA. But as time went on, and I also got exposure to the beauty side at Honest because I had some coworkers who, they were in charge of the beauty side while I was on the baby side, and I could see that and how fun it was to be looking at beauty products versus I'm looking at baby products, so very different, like diapers versus skincare. So I think it was a natural, I had a natural interest in it, and so I just kind of followed that. Yeah.
Okay. And then was it also intentional for you to keep working at smaller companies, or was that also kind of coincidental?
I think it was coincidental. I don't think at that point it was intentional. I mean, I loved the fast paced part of working at a smaller company. So it wasn't for me like, oh, I don't think I can handle this because it's so much smaller. I think it just kind of made sense.
One thing I'm curious about for you personally is what was your North Star when it came to switching companies? Like when it came to like, okay, it's time for me to leave and this is the role or company I'm choosing to move to. Like what was kind of your North Star that was driving those decisions?
Think it was the opportunity to touch on different parts of marketing. So at Honest, as I mentioned, I had kind of transitioned to a non-marketing role. So I was working in retail marketing when I first started, and then I worked more in like planning and strategy. And I didn't feel like that was where I wanted to be. I wanted to be a little bit more creative, I think, and have like more hands-on experience in specific areas of marketing. And that's what Pacifica allowed, was that because we were a small company, I kind of got to really get that like firsthand experience, especially working directly with the founder, like seeing how like her decision making and her process for thinking about, even the copy that goes on packaging or goes in store and things like that are really useful, as a marketer, and also getting experience more on the digital side of marketing.
Okay. Would you recommend, so for somebody that's in their career right now, how would you maybe either pass on that North Star that was yours, or how would you recommend someone kind of makes decisions around like leaving and pursuing new roles, especially within marketing where there's so many places you could possibly go and so many things you could possibly do. Do you have any advice for maybe like knowing when it's time to leave a company or picking a new company or role to work at?
I think and you will feel this, is when your growth naturally starts to plateau, right? When you stay in a role for a little bit of time and then you start to feel like you're not really learning or something is just not your cup of tea and you know that, and but you have to do it day in and day out. I think you just kind of have that knowledge, like there's something better for you and that this is not something you're passionate about. Um, I think today there's so many, like to your point, there's so many ways that you can be a marketer that if you can find a company that lets you explore that a little bit, then you can decide where to, I guess, using your terminology, like the North Star, where that is for you. Because for me at the time, I just generally liked marketing. I liked marketing in general, but I didn't know exactly like where my career would lead. Going into a very small company where I could touch different parts of marketing is actually now, or is where my interest in ecom and digital began. And now ever since Pacifica, I've been in ecom and digital. And so I think earlier on in your career, and even later on in your career, you can still explore. But it's really understanding like I think I'm done here because I'm not growing, I'm not learning, and I'm not interested in something that I'm working on. And that always comes and goes because you're not going to love 100% of your job.
Mhm.
Nobody ever does, but I think you just kind of know it in your bones, like when something's kind of done for you.
I love that. I love that advice. I think that's super helpful. And it's yeah, it's one thing, it's you have to recognize that, but also act on it. And I think the acting on it is the scarier and harder part, but so important because I feel like also in your career, you come across people that are unhappy about their jobs and they'll complain, but then they're still there at that job. And so it's important. I feel like you kind of did a good job of that, of kind of like following what your passion was. And then eventually that will lead you to a role that, you feel really fulfilled in.
Yeah. And it's also talking to people too, because I think if you don't love your job, but you see people in roles that you might be interested in, I think you should just reach out and, ask them what do they do? Why is
Yeah.
it interesting? Is it interesting to you? Especially if it's in your own company, I think people are probably willing to give you a little bit of insight into their world.
Yes, yes. Being curious about other people's roles, especially if they are talking about how much they love their job or if their job just looks cool or interesting or fun and seeing if maybe that's a place that you could also find interesting and fun.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, after Pacifica, so like you mentioned, you started to niche down a bit more in e-commerce and you went over to FabFitFun. So can you tell me about that transition?
Yeah, FabFitFun. So, if your listeners are not familiar with FabFitFun, they're subscription ecom.
Yes, I
Not
remember the
necessarily,
FabFitFun like era.
yeah. So they're not specifically beauty, really. Their box is filled with many types of things, household goods, fashion, accessories, all of these things. I actually went there to join a brand new team. They were called House Brands, and essentially, the team was taking insights from the main subscription box and trying to translate that into FabFitFun owned product. And so, actually, I would say FabFitFun is where my MBA came really in handy, more so because there was me and another woman on the team who also had an MBA, and we were kind of known as the MBAs on the team because I guess we just liked to be in spreadsheets and do a little bit more analytical digging, and so I think we just kind of like eventually got that as our like just to be known as that on the specific house brands team, and so my role there was actually somewhat less marketing, more on like strategy and planning again, but like analytics toward like figuring out merchandising strategy for the house brands division. Um, and then because we were a new brand, we were also, or a new like department within the company. It was really flexible, and we felt more of like it's like a startup within a startup, if that makes sense, because we were kind of trying to build our own business within the larger FabFitFun world.
Interesting. We're kind of having MBA be a little theme here throughout the different roles that you've had. Now, So if someone is right now like kind of deciding if they should get an MBA or not, I don't know if you can speak to this because I mean obviously this is your career journey. You have an MBA, so obviously you are going to find more opportunities where maybe somebody is looking for that experience. But for some people that are maybe on the fence or not, I don't know if you can speak to anything there of like if it's worth getting an MBA or any advice you have.
Yeah, that's a hard question because I do think it's like a case by case individual um, like decision. However, I mean, there are industries that value an MBA more so, right? Like if you're going to go into finance, investment banking, consulting, of course, an MBA is much more like valued in that sense. If you're going to go into beauty and CPG, I think it's just asking yourself, what is the reason you're getting your MBA? Like, what is it? Is it for the network? Is it for the skill set because you have no business background and you just really want to understand how business works? Although that is not the only way to understand how business works. Like, it's in a very expensive way. So I would just say that you kind of have to really ask yourself why. Because at the end of the day, like I said, it's expensive and it's time consuming. And there is that opportunity cost of when, if you do a full time MBA like I did, you're putting your life or your career on hold for a couple of years, right? And in those couple of years, you technically could be building your skill set in business and in marketing, but yet you're learning it in a classroom. So it's really just kind of juggling those things and like what, why at the end of the day you are pursuing it. If you're making a career switch, maybe an MBA actually is helpful because let's say you're starting your career in a completely out of left field category that you're trying to transition into beauty. Not that beauty you require an MBA, but let's say you're trying to transition into a career that requires an MBA, then maybe you would consider that. But I think there's just different variables, and you kind of need to like weigh all of those things for yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I like your analogy there of you also have to weigh the opportunity cost of the years that you're not actively pursuing in your career because I think like one way I remember this was put to me is like, okay, let's say you have to spend $100,000 on your MBA. And but also you could have maybe made $100,000 that year if you were in a job. So it's not that it's just costing you $100,000, but it's also the opportunity cost of $100,000 that you could have made. Um, with anything, with any investment, right? It's a risk, I feel. I mean, I don't know. I didn't do my MBA, so I can't speak to that, but I do think kind of what you said there is important to also like really understand what the like cost is. But I mean, obviously, it sounds like for you it worked out, and I know I've had guests that it has, but it is a big decision.
Yeah. And it's the value of the network again. So
Yeah.
if you know that you really want to meet people in specific industries, that can open up some doors. But again, there's other ways to do that too. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Okay. And then would you say your MBA background made you be just more analytics and data driven in your career?
I think so. It's so funny because when I was in school and right out of business school, I didn't think that of myself. Like I actually thought of myself more as a creative person and, someone who just really loved like the creative side of marketing. But as my career continued and I was kind of maybe like not so much even at my own will was just forced to be in the spreadsheets and like doing a lot more analytics that I think I fell in love with it. And so it's been a useful skill to be able to look at like data sets and complex data and kind of make sense of that and provide some actionable insights based off of your findings.
Hmm. And one thing kind of going through, we'll get to your hourglass rule next, is that you've worked for like quite, I don't want to say large because I more so want to say that you kind of like worked for a better word for like cool or trendy, but you worked at companies that were exciting, I think, to work at their time. So I'm also curious, when these opportunities came, were they from connection that you had in your network? Were they from recruiters reaching out to you? Were they from you like directly applying? Or how did these opportunities find you, or how did you find them?
Yeah, a bit of all of those. So the Mattel job came from being at UCLA, and I actually interned at Mattel between my first and second year at UCLA. After that, it was a couple of MBA friends that I had that introduced me to Honest, and then later at FabFitFun. And Yeah, and then Hourglass was actually not related to the MBA. I think I just saw a job post and applied.
Okay, so a little bit of a
Yeah, yeah, a little bit of all of those
mix.
things.
Is there anything that you do because you've had quite a few different roles? Is there anything that you do in interviews or even now that you're in a higher level position, I'm sure that you like manage and you hire as well, or any advice that you have for standing out in interviews?
Oh, that's a good one. I think the biggest one is do your homework because I think an interviewer can quickly suss out whether you have looked at a company's website, you've looked at their social media, you've even signed up for their emails. And for me, being in ecom and digital, when I'm interviewing someone, I want to know that you did look at our website because if you didn't, then why are you interested in working, on our team? So it's really, yeah, doing the homework and then having good relevant examples of when you solved a problem, when you had a conflict with a coworker and how did you deal with that, and then maybe a really good example of something that you're proud of in your career so far that you've worked on and like why that was, right? And of course clear communication. Like I know that being an interview is nerve-wracking. I mean, I was nervous today and I'm like, I don't know how I'm doing, but you know what I mean? Like I know it's nerve-wracking, but also like being able to clearly communicate your point.
Well, you're doing great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I love those tips. So, you or had a stint at FabFitFun and then bringing you to Hourglass. One thing I also want to just mention, because I have your LinkedIn profile pulled up, but I know our listeners don't, is that this is also like one of your longest tenures because you've been at Hourglass for four
Yeah.
years. Is that correct?
Yes. Almost 4 years in a month.
Oh my gosh. Well, congratulations on 4 years.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about the decision to move over to Hourglass.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a fan of Hourglass. Since actually starting to work in the beauty world, I became somewhat of like a quote unquote like a beauty junkie, like just collecting makeup and collecting skincare. And Hourglass was one of the brands that I just love their products. And so I think it just kind of came naturally when I saw the job post and I applied. And again, like because I was interested in going and staying within ecom and digital, this role specifically in e-commerce like made a lot of sense for me. And since I started Hourglass, so I started in 2020, which is an interesting time to start at any
Yes,
job, as you
yes.
know. Um, so I was actually virtual with our team for almost a year and a half. I didn't meet anyone really in person, or we met, I think, once for a lunch, but like other than that, really didn't see anyone in person. And we all went back into the office sometime in like I want to say like it was like early 2022-ish. But yeah, so that was an interesting experience too, is just not
Yeah.
even really knowing your coworkers or having met them in person.
Was it a big shift culturally or your experience at the company when things were in person? And did you feel like that was for better or for worse?
It wasn't a huge, I don't think it was a shift per se. I think a shift in terms of like I don't know. I think like the when you're meeting virtually, I think there's a feeling of like you can't really talk about like social things because you're here for a meeting and you've
Mhm.
got your topics and it's kind of weird to just like sit there on your screen talking about your weekend or talking about whatever, right? But I think when you're in the office it lends a little bit more to a natural conversation, whether that's like in the kitchen or you're walking to your next meeting. So I think being able to build a little bit more of that camaraderie with your coworkers definitely helps being in the office. But I don't know if it was like a shift per se because like my team was great online and they're also great in person. So yeah.
Okay, so I was like, I also I wonder if it's like weird where it's like, hi, like we've been talking on Zoom for 2 years and now I get to actually like sit next to you or
Yeah,
be next to you in a meeting. And I would imagine it would be more fun to actually get to build those relationships and see those people in person. But I also imagine it being like weird in a good way. I've just been like, oh, this is different.
for sure. I think so. I think the first time we met all everybody was when we went to lunch, and that was weird because I think we were all sitting around eating our lunch, being like, "Wow, like I'm
Like
looking
you're
at you."
taller in
Yeah,
person or
yeah. No, everybody always assumes I'm short, and I am. So it's just funny. I'm like, "How do you know that?"
I've had moments where Well, I'm tall, and I remember one time I went to go meet. So we at SkySci we have a marketing boot camp. It's all digital, but whenever I'm in a city and I get to meet with like graduates, I always like to try to reach out, meet with them. And I remember I met with two graduates who just happened to be on the shorter side, and they were both like, "Oh my gosh, you're so much taller in person." And every single time I get the opposite. Everyone always assumes I'm shorter, and
Oh, really? Okay.
then we're taking the
That's
group picture, and I'm not even that tall. I'm 5'8", but yeah.
tall. That's tall.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
I'm like grazing 5'1". I'm 5'1" on a good day.
Okay.
5'4" when I wear my heels.
I love it. Okay, so you move over during the pandemic. Now, what was different at Hourglass that made you stay there for so much longer compared to some of the other roles that you've had?
Yeah, I think it was the perfect and it has been the perfect intersection of like my interests, right? Like passion for beauty and like the beauty industry and then also e-com and digital. And so I think it just naturally like as time went on, like I have not felt a need to explore because I think I found what my calling is. And it's been really fun. Like we've had so much growth since 2020. And so there's been just a lot of interesting things to work on, and seeing the company kind of skyrocket in these last 4 years has been really exciting. And so for me, I'm like, where else am I going to learn this, or where else am I going to see this at this point in my career? So yeah.
Can you give a little like week in the life of your role? So you're now the senior director of e-commerce. So what do your responsibilities entail?
Yeah, so I actually I oversee our D2C ecom channel from a so we have three websites right now. So there's a US international site, there's a Canada site, and there's a UK. And then my role also entails overseeing customer service, so customer experience and like VIP and loyalty and all of that. And then we also have an Amazon business. So that actually all kind of falls under my umbrella currently. So the day in the life is a kind of a hard question because it's so many things. And Hourglass, even though we've grown so much, we are still, I think, somewhat like we are scrappy and we act like kind of like a startup in some ways. So on any given day, there's just like multiple things to kind of deal with. But as an example, it might be like if we're launching a new product on the website, then it's kind of getting all of those things in order, making sure ecom is ready and our email, our rollout is ready, SMS. But at the same time, when you're launching a product, you're also planning for future launches and other things. So it's not like you can just launch and then you're done. It's like you have a list of projects that are all kind of simultaneously happening. And so, um, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say what the day in the life is because it's really like, it's just so many different projects at the same time.
What is your favorite part of your job? Or is there like one thing that you are responsible for or that you do that you absolutely love?
I think right now my passion is actually really digging into retention and like customer loyalty. And that's also a big piece of marketing too, is I think I kind of mentioned this earlier, but like really understanding like the levers that drive like customer purchasing. Um, because at the end of the day, like you want to grow your business. Marketing is great because you're like speaking to the customer and you're creating all these creative campaigns, but you kind of need to like make sure that it's doing something. Otherwise, right, your business isn't growing. And so for us, like we've really focused now on, okay, we've brought the customer in, how do we make them stay and continue to kind of like go through the Hourglass world and journey and discover new products? And I think being in ecom and digital, I get more of like that kind of like hands-on look into that because we see people and how they enter into our world through email or through like a paid ad or through some other like channel, but it's kind of like what are they kind of buying as they come into our world, and how are they, what's their experience like, and what do they enjoy? And so that's been really interesting, especially this past year. And then another really interesting thing that we just did at Hourglass was we re-overhauled our entire website. And so the Hourglass site that you would have
Oh,
seen
wow.
even like 3 months ago is completely different from the site that you see today. And so that was a fun project that I think was a huge, I guess, like part of like my career right now in ecom, because I feel like you don't often get to kind of like to be
Yeah.
part of such a big a big change
Yeah, that's
in the
massive. Redoing a
business.
website is massive. That's crazy. So, okay, so many things jumping in my head. Now, so let's talk about the like redoing a website. I'm curious. So if so e-commerce, obviously like you're in charge of like all of that. Like when I look at Hourglass or like you mentioned Amazon or like other sites to go purchase the product, you're the one that is kind of overseeing my experience. Is that correct? Or is there a
Yeah,
better
I mean,
way to
I have a
that?
team that kind of helps with like all of these things, but from a general
Yes.
standpoint, yes, my team is in works on these different pieces.
Okay. So from like a broader lens, so I think e-commerce is a super exciting and fun area to be in. When you're thinking about, like you mentioned, retention or customer experience, what is something that you like to look at, or do you have a strategy or a process or specific things you look at for being able to tell, like, if I had a positive experience or if I'm enjoying my experience with a brand?
Yeah, so there's two things. So what you were just describing is more like CRM related, meaning that we would look at like customer sentiment via ratings and reviews. So like a review you might leave on the Hourglass site or some other retail site, or it might be through like a question that you've submitted to our customer service team. So that's part of it where we kind of understand like, do people, so let's say we launched a product. If let's say we get a lot of positive feedback through like even seeing on social media or through like our reviews, and we know we've kind of done a good job in terms of the product itself and maybe just like people being very aware of it. But if there are products that maybe somebody is consistently saying like, oh, this didn't work for me, or it just didn't, it wasn't what I was looking for. That's where we can see, like, we can dig a little bit deeper and kind of understand what, the reasoning behind maybe a more negative sentiment. But then on the retention side, that's like a little bit more specific to like understanding like purchasing behavior based on what somebody might have purchased like as their first purchase. So what I mean is like, let's say you buy a lipstick as your first item. What we want to know is what's your next product that
Okay.
you're going to buy, and like when are you going to buy it, and when should we tell you to buy it? And so it's kind of
Oh,
like mapping. So there's just kind of different pieces, but like mapping your journey as Natalie, entering into Hourglass, and then on the flip side, kind of like just understanding broadly trends and what people are talking about with your brand. So those are kind of two different things. Um,
okay.
yeah,
Interesting. So, for example, like maybe I go in and I buy the skin tint and then maybe I love it and then like maybe I'll buy the primer next or I buy a brush to apply
right.
the skin tint. And so you understanding when someone buys this, then they're maybe like likely to buy this at a certain time. And so you know when to market that to other people who have a similar journey.
Exactly. Yeah. It's being able to segment your users based on purchasing behavior so that you, as a marketer and as a business person, can really maximize and optimize like your revenue potential, right? Like, so you're not just kind of like throwing things into the wind and being like, hope this sticks, hope this sticks, hope this gets to Natalie. It's like,
Yeah.
no, we know that Natalie wants a lipstick first, or sorry, their skin tint first, a brush second, and a primer third. We know that, and that's how we're going to address you or people like you.
Super interesting. So now, like you mentioned, you thought of yourself more as a creative marketing girly when you started, and now obviously
Yeah.
your role is very analytical. Do you have any advice? Because I think a lot of the women I talk to, sometimes if they haven't worked in a data focused role before, it can seem very intimidating and scary. Do you have any advice there when it comes to working like creatively, then like kind of transitioning more into analytics?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think analytics can sound intimidating, like to your point, and overwhelming, but honestly, you start by starting. So I think the biggest thing is if you have access to data, like you have access to somebody's um, purchasing history, you can, like maybe just like go in yourself and see if you can see if there's like trends. I think like with actually doing analytical like actually analyzing data, like you do need a little bit of a skill set. So it's even like maybe taking a class on using Excel and how to look at trend data, or like how to do pivot tables, or but that is a skill set, like a hard skill set that you probably do need to learn if you really want to dig into it. But I think having that kind of foundational knowledge does help. So you can like, if you have access to data, you can at least do some like light digging and see for yourself, like if there's anything interesting that emerges. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I do think it's a combination of, yeah, understanding that it's not maybe the scariest thing in the world. Like, yes, you may need to take a class or something or learn Excel, but that's a skill that you can build on throughout your career.
Yeah.
Okay, also Hourglass. I know, I'm so interested. And I think that it's also interesting now hearing all the pieces like put together. So I feel like it makes your role even more exciting. But have there been any fun campaigns that you've worked on recently or anything that has just been enjoyable for you or any like cool campaigns that you think would be interesting to hear about?
Yeah. Yeah, so we continue to have and do like really cool campaigns. I think especially this year, we've been leaning it more into in-person, in-store experiences. And so we've had a couple of pop-ups that have run this year in New York. So if you've been in New York, you might have seen it, but we just ended our Barney's in Hourglass, New York pop-up. So that was a 6 week long in-person experience. We had events, we had exclusive merchandise. We had designer collabs there. So yeah, that was really fun. A lot of work, but really fun to work on.
And my last question for you here on Hourglass and e-commerce is more on e-commerce in general. Is what do you feel like will be, or what do you think is the future of e-commerce, or any trends that you are excited about, or any things that you are watching or keeping an eye on when it comes to e-com?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm kind of watching and seeing if people are using this more is AI tech in shade matching. And so currently on the
Oh.
site for Hourglass, like we don't use AI, but we do have a quiz that matches you to your complexion, like your foundation or concealer shade. But you've probably seen like some websites now have like the virtual try on where if you like click a button, your webcam turns on and then it starts to put like your lipstick on for you and your foundation. I'm just curious to see if people are actually using it and
Mhm.
if that's converting for the brand, like if people are using it and buying, or is it just like this fun, I'm just going to try it out, but I'm not going to buy anything type of experience. And so
Yeah.
that's one thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I've actually taken the Hourglass shade match quiz before, so I'm familiar with how that looks. I have not done an AI try on for another brand that I can think of. The closest thing I could think is I think when I went to Sephora, I think they have like a camera. They'll like take a picture of your skin or something and they'll shade match you at
Yeah, yeah, that's
Sephora.
similar. And sorry, I meant
Yeah.
AR, not AI, but AR. And AI is actually interesting too, because AI is more like, so we're looking into how AI like technology can help us with like customer experience, right? Like with live chat or like with, that kind of thing. But AR is what I meant with virtual reality,
I imagine that
augmented
piece
reality.
being potentially very impactful in the beauty industry because shade matching is hard. Like that's a hurdle, right? Especially when you're buying something online for the first time. If it's someone's first time buying from Hourglass and it's like, I'll have to figure out my shade. And also I'm sure will help with fewer returns if you're accurately able to match somebody with their shade. Or I'm even thinking like
Yep.
color color matching, is that what it's called? Where you
Hmm.
find tones, yeah, like tones that work with your skin is like trending right now on TikTok and stuff. So people wanting to find lipstick shades or blushes that work best with their tones. But yeah, that's interesting. I haven't thought about that being applicable in the beauty industry, but I can imagine that potentially working. But I feel like you're right. Where is it something that people just like mess around with for fun, or is it actually converting customers? Is that
Yeah.
interesting to
Yeah.
keep an eye on?
There aren't too many brands, honestly, at this point using AR. Like, I think there are some big ones, like YSL has one, Chanel has one. Um, but again, like I think because it requires a lot of tech and a lot of time
Yeah.
and money to implement, I think it's like something that we, as most brands, need to understand. Like, what is the benefit of this? Is it just something
Mhm.
that's nice to have and like you can use it to just say you have it, but people aren't really going to buy anything from it?
Yeah.
So
I
then
think
it's not worth it.
the one that I have used is, have you ever tried on like glasses virtually?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm like thinking of.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But that kind, yeah,
Yeah.
that's like the same technology. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I never liked any of the glass. Like I've done it like multiple times and I've never loved like these all look terrible on me. I need to go in store and try them on for myself. So I can see how that's like a little like toss up whether or not it'll be impactful for consumers. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, Kat. Well, we have gone through so much in your career. It is so inspiring to see where you have gone, what you have learned, and what you have accomplished. Do you have any last advice you would like to share with other women in marketing?
No, I mean, like, I think at the end of the day, it's when you're younger, and this is what I thought too, is that sometimes you feel like the choices you're making are just so, like, so big, right? Like where you go to work and if the decision to leave a company. But when you look back on your career journey, I think it all starts to like make sense to you why, like the things that you did, and that you don't need to stress too much in that time because it'll all work out. And I know that sounds really like really cliche, but it does because like every step that you take in your career leads you to the next great thing. And even like I did, I bounced around a little bit, you know, because I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do and what I'm interested in. And I think that's okay because then you end up finding the thing that like really, you know, gets you up in the morning. And so it's okay to like make those little mistakes in the beginning or to like try to like figure it out.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful advice to end a very beautiful episode. Thank you so much, Kat, for coming on Marketing Girly. It has been so much fun chatting with you.
Okay, thank you so much. It was super fun.